and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. Last episode, we were fortunate enough to interview Grace Munoz on her collection, Coatlicue Girl. This episode, we will begin our discussion on Running by Natalia Sylvester.
Welcome back, everyone. We had a little hiatus over the summer. Hope you all are doing well. And it's 2020, and we have season 3 that we just announced today. A whole slate of books for the fall semester. So we're really excited about what we have in store. We're hoping to kind of be synchronous, with a lot of these releases of books. And so if you haven't checked it out, we just put out the flyer on our social media. And it is indeed Natalia Sylvester's book that starting off with. So it's the first time we've ever had a book from Natalia, but Natalia is actually one of the few writers that we've been able to host at our campus at El Paso Community College. So we're very excited about being able to talk about her book officially on the podcast.
Yeah, it's so great having her visit the campus and get to talk to not just the students, but we were able to get people join us from outside the community who specifically wanted to come and listen to her speak. So
that's
really
true.
Cool.
Yeah, I know there was like Andrea Beltran, who's a local poet and also a published author. Actually just got her book, and she got to see El Paso. She's super friendly, and someone who we also have to thank for being able to being so hospitable that, if you remember, Vanessa, when we met her at the Texas Book Festival, she introduced us to Gali Fajardo, Anstein, and other writers, so she really opened doors for us, and for that we are truly grateful. And we hope to be able to bring her back one day once the pandemic is over, because she really did have a big impact on our students.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I believe Running is the first YA book from her. She's got 2 other ones called Chasing the Sun. That's her debut novel. And then Everyone Knows You Go Home, which won an International Latino Book Award. But this is actually technically her first YA book. And we've talked about, the whole YA label a lot. But I think this definitely, you can tell that it has those the target audience in mind.
Yeah, I forget it's only an audio podcast because I'm just nodding my head vigorously to what you just said. But yes, you make great points. Wonderful. I agree.
Well, it's published by Clarion Books, and we were talking about the cover, right? And the cover is illustrated by Alex Cabal, but it's designed by Charisma Rodriguez. I really love the cover. We've talked about the covers of these books a lot. They say don't judge a book by it, but it, of course, is one way that it attracts your attention, just like cereal boxes, right? So,
but in this case, the toy inside is something else, and we're going to talk about that these next couple episodes.
Yeah. Did you guys want to say anything else about Natalia before we talk about the book proper?
Well, I mean, based off of meeting her the last time she visited El Paso, I'm absolutely a fan of her writing. And more so, I just really appreciate getting to hear her speak. I think Natalia Sylvester has such a great perspective on writing, and it's it's worth hearing. I know at this year's AWP, she had a panel that I was able to I didn't get to talk to her. It was kind of like in passing because it was
Mhm.
just I was trying to like hit up everything. But I got to sit in on that panel. And that was always great. Anyway, so rambling aside, fanboying aside, I was super excited to dive into the book, and quite honestly, I was very fortunate enough to just kind of have the free time. I picked it up, and I didn't put it down. Like I read it in one read, one sitting. It moved so smoothly. It was like a little, like I said, there was something very cinematic about it, where it just had this
Mm.
moving action that
Mhm.
I was like, all right, what happens next? Ooh, what's gonna happen next? Oh, no way, the chapter did not just end like that. I have to know what's happening next. Till eventually, like, even though it was like 4 or 5 a.m., I'm like, no, I'm finishing this. Um, I had
Yeah.
my little desk lamp on in the nighttime, pre-dawn, and it was definitely worth the read. I can't wait to explore its themes and characters and all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely a page turner, and given all that's happening right now, I think it also um makes it very accessible, something to kind of get your mind off things to some degree, um, in the sense that, the themes are not necessarily heavy. There's books, of course, that like are tough to get through because of that. But this is not one of them. So I encourage you all to pick up a copy, so you can read it alongside us. And it just came out a couple weeks ago, so or I think it was last week actually. Um,
Pretty close. So it's barely the
yeah,
beginning of August. So
Mhm.
you might be listening to this in the future, right? August 2020, new release. Yeah, definitely go pick it up. Vanessa, what do you think?
I really like this book, and I also really like Natalia Sylvester. I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to go to the reading when she was here in El Paso, but I did meet her at the Texas Book Festival, and she was so nice. She did really introduce me to a lot of people that opened a lot of doors for me. She's just so nice, and I'm really excited to talk about this book.
Right on.
awesome. Um, I think we had talked about, um, well, maybe before we get to the themes, because I think that's going to be the bigger discussion, is we could give readers a preview of the characters. Um, so Vanessa, what are the main characters that you want to highlight?
Well, obviously, Mari is going to be the main character in the story. So we're following her as she's going through this journey of kind of discovering who she is. So it is kind of a coming of age story. Her father, um, Anthony Reese, is running for president. And so it's kind of putting her into different types of positions and situations now than in the past when he was running for other positions. She's kind of under like a microscope, and people are kind of seeing what her next move is in a way.
Hmm.
Um,
Who would you say
oh,
so far? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to talk about Jackie. I feel like she's another important character. She kind of, I wouldn't say antagonizes Mari, but
Mm.
kind of pushes her towards taking that next step and discovering her political identity, per se.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, is like, who do you think the
Okay.
antagonist is? Yeah. Um, any other major characters that you want to just give readers a heads up on?
Um, I think another one would be Gloria, who kind of helps the
Mm.
family out a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and she's kind of, I wouldn't, I think she kind of represents like a role model of what Mari wants to be when she gets older. So just kind
Mm.
of watching her to see what she needs to do.
Hmm.
Um,
Which is interesting, right? That, if I may just interrupt, that she doesn't really connect as much to her mom as she does to her
Mm.
dad.
Mhm.
And Gloria, of course, or Gloria. Um, Richie, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so we have a pretty interesting ensemble of characters. Vanessa mentioned Jackie, but there's a couple others that we meet as well. On top of that, you kind of have Mari has her school friends. One of the things that we learn is she's kind of in this new situation from school because of who her dad is, and he's run. We learn that he's running for president, but he's already a U.S. senator, and he's I think he's also been a Florida legislator. So he's spent some years in politics, and this is kind of the environment that Mari has grown up in. And so it's interesting looking at that kind of life. I think that's kind of a new take. It does remind me, in some cases, of when in Randy Ribai's book, Jay, when he goes to visit his family in the Philippines, right? His uncle was like in a kind of a high position in the police, and so you kind of have what that means, of like upholding yourself in the public eye. You see a little bit of that. And it's also interesting to kind of get that sense of perspective from her younger brother, Ricky, who's I think 7 years younger than her in this book. Anyway, it's quite the tale of what that is. The campaign and pretty much as Vanessa said, in light of Mari's awakening of in a sense of her trying to figure out what she knows and what she believes in, because as we learn as the book progresses, um she's kind of had a little bit of that sheltered life where they don't her family doesn't like talking about politics, which is like the weirdest thing since her father's in politics.
Yeah.
And so when as she's getting older in high school, she gets confronted about that, and so she starts thinking about these things in a real capacity. Anyway, what was the question again?
It
Well,
was just other
we're
characters.
I know,
yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's doing
Oh.
comedy.
um, no, but I just kind of want to reiterate what you are saying about what Vanessa said about the microscope. It reminds me a lot of like celebrity culture and social media in general, right? Where like, I mean, even before social media, of course, we had paparazzi, right? And um, uh, you know, just the idea that because he's a politician and she's the daughter of one, um, that yeah, I mean, everything she does is going to be overanalyzed, blown up, and I think it's something that we see more and more of, even if you're not famous, right? Like you can become famous and go viral because of social media. Something that you do either, of course, positively or negatively. Um, so I think that this novel does a great job of capturing that kind of environment, the stress that the families go through because of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, even more so because of the technology and social media, right? Yeah, that's even more so when you have our 45th president like using Twitter as kind of his platform. That's big, and even modern politicians like AOC, that's kind of where I think that's interesting, where the public discourse is being taken,
Hmm.
and that it's
Mm.
still like a brand new territory. And that's actually one of my favorite things about this book is, especially if we're teaching this to our students in our classes, a lot of
Hmm.
people will be able to relate to technology and social media that they use, Instagram, Twitter,
Mm.
and I think other aspects, right? Like the use of drones and privacy. Like these are things in the last 5 or 10 years that have been big. There's been big questions about in terms of privacy and so yeah, through this story we get to talk about all these things.
Hmm. For sure. Um, Before we get to the theme, so this is a story set, in Florida. Of course, you mentioned he's a senator from there, and you know, naturally, or maybe not so naturally, but it's a Cuban American family, um, and so you really do get a good glimpse into Cuban American culture. In part, I think we haven't mentioned this, I think, but because, well, maybe not because, but not surprisingly, um, since they are Cuban American, his father, he is a Republican. Um, and so, it kind of goes into how not just because you're Latinx are you going to be liberal, or not just because you're Hispanic are you going to be a Democrat. Um, Cuban Americans, in general, right? I mean, I always hate generalizing, but I have a Cuban uncle, and he's also conservative, and it kind of just goes back to like Fidel Castro and like their views of like socialism and liberal society. So it has historical roots. Um, but that's another thing that readers should know is it's kind of refreshing in that regard, because um, a lot of other stories like you know um, the there we I can't think of another one, where we have that kind of like prominent conflict of you know the varying political philosophies in that way. But I mean, I guess patron saints kind of goes into that, but
Mhm.
that's in the Philippines.
Yeah, I mean, you have a certain sense of like what kind of history that they want to share and don't share
Hmm.
in patron saints that shows up here. A little bit of
Yeah,
that's like politically motivated, but I hear you.
yeah. What about then the themes? I know you, Vanessa, had some of the themes that you wanted to highlight.
I kind of feel like we've touched, well, the two main ones that I felt we kind of touched
Hmm.
on, and that was the theme of identity,
Hmm.
which I kind of touched upon earlier, um, in following Mari's journey of not only being in high school, but also of dealing with like social media and like finding her political identity, which also goes into the other theme that I was going to talk about, which was social media, which we kind of already touched on. So we do see a lot of Twitter. One thing that I did find interesting was that Mari, right before her father started running for president, her parents had her change all of her social media accounts to private,
Mm.
um, which was interesting because rather than having her show her side, they were like closing her off, I guess, in a sense,
Mm.
rather than allowing her to use it as her voice.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a form of censorship, and
mhm,
it would have been interesting if, like, instead of that, they would have. I mean, maybe it would have been worse where like someone else just took over the account, right, and pretended to be her, and just kind of, just to support his
mm,
dad's campaign.
mhm,
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of like one of her big struggles early on, right? Is fighting this idea that the public image, right? She has a media coach, right?
mhm,
Telling, kind of feeding her like the acceptable lines, what to say, and as you say, she's finding her own political identity, and she's kind of realizing it's not quite matching up with that. And as you said, there's a certain kind of silence happening.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that more once we make the connections, but definitely one of the big themes. To me, I think that's the big theme. But um, Vanessa, was there another theme that you wanted to highlight?
Oh, well, I think family plays plays another big role throughout because you see a lot of her interactions not only with her parents but her younger brother and her grandparents as well.
Hmm.
Mm,
And that becomes a conflict in and of itself, right? Because, I
mhm,
mean, just to kind of give a taste, but I mentioned that that his father's her father's Republican, But she's still kind of finding herself, right? Which side of is she going to be on? Being a young girl, who's coming into herself. And so, in terms of family, I think that's something that is definitely a point of contention, um, and kind of makes it a little bit awkward, right? I mean, you know, the idea of like going against your family because of your beliefs, and something we've talked a lot about in this uh, in this show.
Um, so yeah, loyalty kind of plays into that factor a little bit as well, right? Like you were just talking
Mm.
about.
Hmm.
That's kind of one of the struggles there is what does it mean to be loyal to her family, right? And even if what she's learning is at odds with supporting her family, in this case her father,
Hmm.
uh, and the stuff she discovers, which I think we haven't really hit on it, but I think there's some other themes as well. But what else did you pick up on, Vanessa?
I think culture is another one, maybe. Um, just the way that things, well, not only things that are done in our house, but the I think food plays somewhat of a role in the kinds of things that they're eating.
Yeah, I know you guys talked about that pre-show, right? With the avocado tree, um, and I think we can get into that when we get into the novel in the next episode. But also just Cuban food in general, and the relationship between food and culture, um, especially Latinx culture, um, is always going to be something that comes up in these kinds of rich stories.
Yeah, yeah. So food, like, and the way it relates to culture, is incredibly significant. Absolutely. And to maybe a much more, maybe even at the heart of it, like, with it's mentioned in the story, but like even just the right to something like water. Okay, that's beyond food. That's like life sustenance, right? And so it becomes a very politicized thing in the book, right? Just like it did for Flint, Michigan, which is mentioned several times throughout. But that's kind of a huge key in the book is environmental justice,
Hmm.
Mm.
especially in its relation to politics and youth activism. I think those are like some of like kind of the heavy hitters that are like to me like the meat that we'll be talking about in upcoming episodes.
For sure, for sure. Um, so, what about connections then, Vanessa? Which stories that we've talked about, or even just pop culture, um, were you thinking of that it reminded you of by reading Mari's story?
Well, I definitely feel that the way she's trying to find her voice and who she is definitely relates to a lot of the main characters in like stories like Poet X, The Hate You Give. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. Also, I feel like
Hmm.
mm, you guys also mentioned connections to Patron Saints earlier, I believe.
Hmm.
Um,
What's the connection there? Would you say it's still about identity, or what was the connection you had in mind?
for Patron Saints.
Hmm.
Well, Richie had mentioned earlier, I think, um, the connection with having someone you're related to having a position of power of some sort.
Mm.
Um, I definitely relate her a little bit more to Star from The Hate You Give than I think any of the other ones.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, kind of what Richie mentioned, right, about youth activism and injustice, right?
Hmm.
Fighting against
Yeah.
injustice. Um, any other connections? Pop culture, like music, movies, television. Um,
I think you mentioned a
we
couple TV shows that she mentions, right, Vanessa?
Yeah. So she mentions this one is her favorite. I Love Lucy, which I've never seen. I don't really know a lot about it. Um, she also mentioned MTV Cribs. I think I saw him mention the name Chrissy Teigen, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so too. I've heard her name.
Yes, she mentions her later on in the book. Well, she mentions a couple celebrities
Mhm.
related to their cause through social media.
Mm.
Very, very much planted in our universe, of course, our world, and in addition to the pop culture, right? She talks about why she loves I Love Lucy. That's makes a couple appearances throughout the book, right? And it's a show that she grew up watching with her mother. Her mother introduced her through old DVDs because it is a little asynchronous as far as like her age and the time period and when it aired. You wouldn't really necessarily think
Mm-hmm.
she would like that kind of show. It's an oldie, right? It's a classic.
Mhm.
But unless you were watching it, it's something. But of course, she connected it for a bunch of different reasons. She really loved Lucille Ball, and of course, we mentioned the whole Desi Arnaz thing, right? Her husband, and she even kind of goes in depth about it later in the book. How Lucy didn't want to do the show without her husband. She wanted. It was crucial for her to have him on the show with her, and that was kind of a nice little thing. And so it's also a bonding moment too, like a connection that she shares with her mother in that sense, and her culture.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, I guess it's kind of pop culture, but we already talked about this. But social media, I know you had mentioned that, Vanessa. Something that I think makes this novel, like you said, very much um, of a contemporary novel. Um, n- you mentioned Twitter, um, and privacy. Of course, you mentioned Bridgie. Um, so it does really get into the way that you are growing up. Me and you, Richie, we didn't really grow up with that, um, but um, it is also aware of like it's almost like it's happening right now, right? Not just because it's election season, but it does mention our current president. Um, so I really like that about this book. Definitely something that makes connections with the present as well as the past. Um, and then I just wanted to plug my top three favorite sitcom of all time, which is One Day at a Time, the remake, and uh, it's also about a Cuban American family, and there's only 3 seasons of it on Netflix. But I really love that show. I think it's very progressive. It's very it's hilarious, of course. It's a requirement for sitcoms, but also very good at teaching lessons about society. Um, so I made a lot of connections to it. It reminded me a lot about it, and I might just watch it again, just to kind of um, refresh myself on it. But to me, that was my big connection.
That's awesome, man. You know what that reminded me
Mm-hmm.
of when we would take classes with Dr. Jay Surya. I know
Hmm.
you've taken classes with her recently, right, Vanessa?
Yeah. For this, well, past semester.
Okay, so I don't know if she still does it, but I remember in every class I took with her that she would always kind of provide um, a list of other readings and movies and TV shows related to whatever we were reading. Like
Mm.
I thought that was super cool. It's cool. So I don't know if you guys remember getting anything like that.
No, I mean she doesn't
Mm.
give us a list or anything, but as we're talking about them, she'll mention them.
Okay, okay. It might have been grad school classes, but I think that was super cool. Like the way we're talking about connections here and the way you were plugging that show, which by the way,
Hmm.
I added to my list right now. Got to get that in before the semester starts. But
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. But it took me back to that list where she would like, okay, and these are movies about the topic, and TV shows, like all the pop culture stuff that you can get related to whatever it is that we were reading. So shout out to Dr. J.
Yeah. You know, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I had forgotten about it. But yeah, Dr. J is great at that and great at teaching in general. Um, and Yeah, so that was my connection. I don't know if I know you already mentioned Richie, I Love Lucy, but I don't know if you had another connection.
As far as like media and stuff, again, going to like actual political issues, Flint, Michigan is mentioned a couple times throughout the book, as well as at one point references to the survivors of the Parkland High School shooting massacre that occurred in Parkland, Florida. In particular, how some of those students became kind of prominent activists and were through social media um, galvanized a lot of people and organized things, and but also were at the front of some pretty ugly criticisms as well, which I think um when we talk about social media and technology, that's kind of one of the dark sides. People who troll, who bully. I think cyberbullying comes into play as well in this
Mhm.
book. So
Mm.
um, I just think the reality of these things mentioned in the book kind of highlight what's happening to the characters as well. But yeah, as far as connections, that's something more grounded in political realities.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, the environmental issues in Flint. Definitely, something that, of course, is still a problem. Um, it also mentions, one thing you associate with Miami is hurricanes. And I think we just had Hurricane Isaias that kind of just, not often that it just kind of skips Florida, but it seemed like it did. Um, and, ended up hitting the Carolinas instead. But definitely something that, as someone who has family in Miami that I care a lot about, it's always something that kind of they have to worry about. But, people who live in Miami kind of get used to boarding up your home and things like that. So,
Yeah.
Vanessa, was there anything else you wanted to tell our listeners to expect in this book? We haven't talked too much about style, but if I don't know if there was anything else.
Um, not not that I can think of.
I don't think we mentioned this, but we talked a lot about Natalia and meeting her, having the privilege of meeting her. But she was born in Lima, Peru, so she's actually Peruvian, and then she ended up immigrating here and earned a BFA from the University of Miami, and now lives here in Texas. Um, and um, in terms of her style, I have read Everyone Knows You Go Home. Um, and this one is just as engaging, but like I said, because it is YA, um, I mean, we talked a lot about the YA label, but I think kind of what you were hinting at, Richie, is it has these teachable moments in interspersed, right? And so I really see this as a very teachable novel. Not to say the other one isn't, but I think this one is um, because of its target audience. I could see it all the way from like teaching it in like sixth, seventh grade, middle grade to high school to college. So um, very much, um, accessible and engaging, like I said, and descriptive in its setting, um, uh, using, being bilingual and all these other things, right? That just make it a very, like you said, one of those books you just can't put down until you finish it.
Right.
So I think we can hit pause, and for our next episode, we'll dive into the first half of the book. Um, and I know that Natalia has been having a lot of events to promote it. So if you all, can join in, we encourage you to do so. Um, and follow along, like I said, as we uh, read this book, and support a local bookstore if you can, however you can, whether it's curbside or just ordering online as much as you can. Support Natalia. Um, yeah, I don't know if you all had any final thoughts.
Just join us for the ride. Pick up a copy. I know that we'll possibly have some ways in which you can win a copy.
So September, or it might be early October, one or the other. Later on, we'll announce the date where we're going to have a live read-in, wherein the prize is going to be a copy of this book, and it's geared towards El Paso Community College, but it is open to the public. So we'll have more details on that. We did a giveaway for Coatlicue Girl from Gris Munoz, which was our last book. So we're hoping to keep these giveaways going. Just another way to kind of give back to y'all for supporting us.
There you go. Perfect. Perfectly said.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode discussing Running by Natalia Sylvester. And if you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.